about similar subject matter, then he would say I violated the rules of national security. I know exactly what he's up to, and that is why I will continue to do my job, which is Leader of the Opposition, to hold him accountable. I will not be silenced. This is Canada, and in Canada we have the freedom of expression. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
By the way, the government didn't do anything because the NDP kept them in power. And back in committee, they do exactly the same thing. They speak, they go to hold press conferences and act all tough. Back in committee, all they do is give all the procedural support necessary for the Prime Minister to cover it up again and again and again.
You made some public statements over Twitter stating quite directly that you're in favor of a independent national investigation on what we're calling foreign interference. You've been vocal about this. It's quite unusual for someone who's been in your position in the past to make that kind of statement. Why is it that all these other processes, like what's going on here, the proposals for public hearings, why do you think these are not the best vehicles?
Well, it's a good question. There are good vehicles. The thing with the parliamentary committees such as NISRA and NISCOP, their prime work, and they do excellent work, is they review the compliance of the collector agencies. That's what I guess you could say almost hard driven to, is focusing on that, not so much focusing on the machinery of government and how they're handling things. Now, there's obviously merit in having that. But what I am sensing, mostly through media, mostly through parliamentarians and everything else, is that a lot of Canadians are getting frustrated or agitated to find out if there's any clarity to this. And then we also have
about similar subject matter, then he would say I violated the rules of national security. I know exactly what he's up to, and that is why I will continue to do my job, which is Leader of the Opposition, to hold him accountable. I will not be silenced. This is Canada, and in Canada we have the freedom of expression. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable
spoke in relation to the issues concerning Member of Parliament Michael Chong, that in the case of the Minister of Public Safety and senior officials in his office, that with respect to the sensitive email that had been sent in May of 2021, that they didn't have the login information and couldn't access the email. Now, Minister Blair was the minister for 18 months as of May of 2021. What does that say about the machinery of government, that a minister who was in place for 18 months didn't have access to emails? Emails were being sent. CSIS was continuing to send those emails, and they were effectively going into a black hole. That doesn't seem to add up.
Well, that's exact. I mean, what inference we want to draw from that is you have all this sensitive reporting that is going into the system, which, and I'm quoting from the rapporteur's findings, that it's basically bobbing on a digital sea in computers. Maybe I'm being a little harsh, but it seems that there is a dearth of briefing up that's going on that you would expect with various departments would be done. Also sounds like a predilection for digital copies, and that, you know, hard copy briefings are kind of passé. And I think there's advantages actually in hard copy. But it does sound to me like CSIS is putting in these very sensitive reports, and there are these glitches and gaps, and they probably didn't start, you know, last year, that needed to be rectified so that that critical information would go at least the cabinet minister level to make his decision. So I have no idea why. It just strikes me as dysfunctional.
But ultimately, Madam Chair, through you, ultimately, what does that say about ministerial responsibility? I mean, ultimately, who bears responsibility? A minister is in place for 18 months.
Yeah.
The Minister of Public Safety, we have an email on a matter as critical as an accredited diplomat threatening and targeting a sitting member of Parliament, and the minister doesn't know about it because he doesn't have access.
Yeah. You know, just touching on a point that Mr. Wilczynski had mentioned, he talked about the rigorous review on the collection side, CSIS, CSE, CAF, others. are subject to on an annual basis in terms of their performance and compliance with policy and that. I am suggesting that on the policymaker side, the machinery of government, we don't have the same type of review or accountability. It should be ministerial accountability. I think that's part of the bedrock of our parliamentary system, is where every department is responsible, and you would think there's mechanisms for briefing up, particularly in security and intelligence, such that you don't actually have to have a particular passcode to read a particular message to factor that into your decision making on something as critical as a threat to the members of parliament.
For their own constituents. They put on a big show in here. We've already passed a motion like this, by the way. The government didn't do anything because the NDP kept them in power. And back in committee, they do exactly the same thing. They speak, they go to hold press conferences and act all tough. Back in committee, all they do is give all the procedural support necessary for the Prime Minister to cover it up again and again and again.
Well, Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Stanton, after CSIS had sent that email in May, and it went into a black hole, and the minister didn't know, even though he had been minister for 18 months. CSIS then tries to, again, alert the minister, other departments, the PCO, when they prepared the July 2021 memo. And that went to the PCO, it went to the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, and yet apparently the Prime Minister didn't learn about that. Does that sound believable to you? And if the Prime Minister is in fact saying he had no idea, I mean, what does that say about the information flows and structures that he has in place to be briefed and be alerted to critical national security information?
I mean, it's not inspiring. The thing to appreciate is we talk about threat-related, and in this context, of course, as a member of Parliament, you know, a lot of threat-related intelligence, whether it's dealing with terrorism or espionage or things like that, there already is a drill, there already is performance. They don't wait for CSIS to send assessments into that email system. So this would go in as an assessment piece on the foreign intelligence threat with all sorts of other information that probably goes in on a routine basis. And I've heard it said in the public, they say, well, why doesn't CSIS call, or why doesn't CSIS hint, you know, there's something in there? And what we don't want to have with security intelligence is where the agencies are shaping the narrative or saying to the policymakers, here, you must read that. So what I'm saying is I don't think that report went in to the system and that either the producers, CSIS, thought, okay, this needs immediate attention. It just goes in as a routine process on that. And I do find it disheartening because I spent, you know, 32 years in the business where you collect information, considerable risk and expense, producing intelligence reports, and so you like to think that somebody read them or found them interesting. But perhaps what this initial review is revealing is those gaps are more significant than maybe we appreciated if reports are just floating around the system.
And the Prime Minister is just playing whack-a-mole.
Forward a budget that gives so much help to Canadians, the Conservatives don't even have any questions on it.
Yes, I'll give you.
Thanks very much. Just to add, I think it's really important to understand that both within the Department of Public Safety, where Minister Blair was the accountable minister, and again, I also agree with the concept of ministerial accountability, that there are structures. There is a branch responsible for national security that does receive regular, information and intelligence from CSIS and other agencies. It's the Deputy Minister of Public Safety that determines how much and what goes to ministers. As I mentioned in my opening statement, there's a massive volume that comes out every single day.